Hey guys, I'm back with a new video. So in this video, we'll start with a new topic, which is file handling in Python. So working with files will enable you to store some data of your programs inside the files so that you are able to work with it at later points of time as well. Right now in the programs that we made, as and when we close the terminal process, our application state gets lost. It doesn't persist. Now let us take the example of reading a CSV file, which we'll see later in great detail. Suppose you want to analyze the data and you would like to store the analysis data under some persistence layer so that it can later be retrieved as and when required. Now these are some of the use cases for which definitely file handling comes to the rescue. So let us first understand what a file actually is before we start working with them using some code. So what are files? Files are containers which are named locations on disk to store related information. Now since our RAM is volatile, we need some persistence layer to store the data permanently so we can later use the data as and when required. So now we know what a file is. Let us understand some typical steps that you need to follow in order to work with files. So the very first thing is to open the file first. So if you want to read the file, then it is made to open in the read mode. If you want to write to the file, then it is made to open in the write mode. Now once the desired operation gets completed, we then have to close the file in order to release the resources that were allocated during the creation of file object for working with files. If we don't do that, memory leaks can occur in our application, which of course we don't want. So now let us talk about the opening of files in Python. So Python has a built-in open method to open a file, and what this function does is it spits out a file object or a file handle using which you can easily read or modify the contents of the file. So back in my editor, I have a text file which is content.txt in which some text is given. Now let us perform the first step of opening the file. So in my file handling.py file, I can say file object, and I can use the open function and pass on the content.txt file from which I want to read. Now as the second argument, we can specify the mode while opening a file. So let us go back to our slides and see what modes are available to us. Now by default, if we don't specify anything as the mode, it is reading in text mode. In this mode, we get strings when reading from the file. Now if you are dealing with non-text files such as images and executable files, it is the binary mode that is used. So here are some file modes with their descriptions. Then first we have the mode R, which is opening a file for reading, which is the default mode. Then we have W, which opens the file for writing. It creates a new file if it doesn't exist or truncates the file if it exists. Then we have X, which is opening a file for exclusive creation. If the file already exists, the operation will fail. Then we have A. It opens the file for appending at the end of file without truncating it. If the file doesn't exist, it creates a new file. Then we have T, which opens the file in text mode. Then we have B, opening the file in binary mode. And then we have plus, which opens the file for updating, reading and writing. So now we know what are file modes. Let us go back to our editor and see how we can open the file. So back in my editor, let us set the mode here, and I will use the read mode. So I will set R as the mode. Now as the third argument, we have to specify the encoding. So I'll specify that as UTF-8 because we want our code to be consistent across all the platforms. As a side note, when you're working with text files, always specify the encoding that you are using. So here I will say encoding and set that to UTF-8. So now we have our file object. Let us print the file object to the terminal. So I can say print file object, run the command python file handling.py, press enter, and you can see we are getting the file object being logged to the terminal. So now we have opened the file in read mode. We have the file object instance with us. Let us read the contents of the file So for reading the file, we can make use of the read method that is available on the file object that the open method gave us. So I can say content, and I will say file object. Use the read method to read the contents of the file. And now let us print the content that we get back to the terminal and run the file. So this is the content that we are getting back from our content.txt file. Now you can also specify the size argument to the read method to read in the size number of bytes or size number of data. If you omit the size parameter like we are doing here, it reads and returns up to the end of the file. Now here you can see that the read method returns a new line. Now once the end of the file mark is reached, if you try to read further, you will always get an empty string. Next, let us see how we can change our file cursor. That is how we can change the position of the cursor, and this comes in very handy when we want to start file manipulation from a specific position and not from the start of the file like we usually do. So for changing the file cursor position, we have the seek method. And then we have another method called as tell, which tells us the current cursor position in number of bytes. So now let us see these methods in action. So right here I can say print file object dot tell, and this will tell us the current cursor position. So if I run the file now, and you can see that the current cursor position is at the 155th byte. Now let us try to change the position of our file cursor using the seek method. So I can say changing the file cursor to a specific position. Current cursor position. So now to change the file cursor to a specific position, I can say file object dot seek and pass on the current byte on which you want to place your cursor. So I will say 23. And if I now print the current cursor position down here and run the file, you can see now our new current cursor position is at byte number 23. Now there are a couple of ways that are both efficient and fast and can be used for reading a file line by line, and for that we can make use of the for loop that we learned in the iteration video. So I can say reading the file, so for line in file object and print line, and then I can say end. And if I now run the file, you can see we are getting this as our output. Now as you can see, we are now reading the contents of the file starting from the byte 23, and that is why we are not getting some of the initial content. So to get the entire content of the file line by line, what should you do? If you think that we should set the cursor position to byte 0 and then read line by line, then you are absolutely right. So let us do that. So I can make use of the seek method and pass 0 as the argument to place the cursor at the start of the file. So placing the cursor at the start of the file. So file object dot seek and pass in 0, and then let us copy this line down below and run the file, and now you can see we are getting the entire content of the file line by line being logged to the terminal. Now as a side note, remember that the lines in the file itself include a new line character. So here we are using the second parameter of the print function to avoid two new lines from getting printed. Alternatively, we have two other methods for reading the contents of the file line by line. So let us go over them. So first is reading individual line of a file. For that we can make use of the readLine method. Then secondly, we have readLines method, which gives us a list of the lines of the entire file. Now once the end of file mark is reached for each of these methods then return an empty string, because then no content is there to work on. Now since with this for loop we have read the entire file again, our cursor position is at the end of the file. So let us set it back to 0. so as to further experiment with other methods on our file. So I'll copy this code and put it down below to set the cursor back to byte 0. Now to print an individual line of the file, I can say print file object dot read line, and let us run the file. And you can see this gives us success is not final, failure is not fatal, it is the courage. So now to get these lines, I can make use of the read lines method, because now our cursor is at this point, okay, because we have read the first line using the read line method. Now to get the list of remaining lines of the entire file, we can say print file object dot read lines and run the file, and you can see we are getting to continue that counts, which is the second line and then the third line, and they are getting logged as a list of lines. So I hope I made everything crystal clear on how you can read the contents of a file. Now let us move forward with writing to files in Python. Writing content to a file. To write the content into a file in Python, we need to first open our file in the write mode, which is W, or append mode, which is A, or the exclusive creation mode, which is X. Now there is one thing you need to be extra careful about. If the file already exists, the write operation will overwrite the existing content, and due to this all the previous data gets erased, and of course we don't want this to happen. Now for writing a string or a sequence of bytes in case of binary files, we use the write mode. Now this method returns the number of characters written to the file. So I can make use of the with keyword in Python. Now the benefit of using the with keyword is that it does automatic closing of the files, and it ensures proper acquisition and release of resources in order to prevent memory leaks. So we don't require to manually close the file using the close method. The with keyword will handle that for us. Now what I want to do is I want to create a new file programmatically and write some lines inside it. So I can say with, and here I will again open the file. I will create a new file codes.txt, and since the file doesn't exist already, it will get created. In the write mode it gets opened, and I will use the encoding as UTF-8, and then we can use an alias as file object, and then the file object has a write method, and let us write a line to our file and a new line character. With that, let us run the file to see the output. Now you can see a codes.txt file got created, and here we are having a line which we wrote, so this works fine as well. So what this code does is that it first creates a new file codes.txt in the current working directory. If the file doesn't exist, if the file already exists, it gets overwritten. Consider this case where we open the file using the open function. If we don't close this file, a memory leak can occur, and in order to close this file, we need to use the close method that is defined on the file object. So let us close the file that we opened here. So right below here, I will say manually closing the file. But when we are writing the file, we open the file in write mode with the with statement, and once we are done with writing the contents to a file, the file will automatically get closed once the content is written into the codes.txt file. So here I can say file object dot close. So if you are using this way of opening the file, you definitely have to call the close method like this in order to prevent memory leaks for occurring in your application. So this was all about the video on file handling in Python, where I covered how we can work with files using Python. We discussed what are file modes, how to open and close the file, how we can read the contents of the file, different methods of reading the contents of the file line by line using read line and read lines methods, how to write the content to a file, changing the cursor position of the file object. Definitely feel free to dive into the official docs So if you like the video, do give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon for all the upcoming uploads, and I will see you guys next time.